History is fickle. It can sometimes give people far too much credit while at the same time miscasting others as failures, schemers, or just incompetent. This video is not just about a car which has lived in drag racing infamy for many years, but about the man who designed it, built it, who raced it, and who has ultimately been wronged by the history books, internet experts, and virtually anybody who has regurgitated ad nauseum a wildly incorrect story that proliferates to this day. The man's name is John Smiser, and his creation was the Terrifying Toronado. This is the story, the accurate and true story of the man and his machine, and how history has done them both very, very wrong. I'm going to tell this story in three distinct parts. The first part you're watching now will establish the players, the genesis of the idea of the Terrifying Toronado, and how this whole thing started, and frankly why I became obsessed with the story. Part 2 will tell the tale of the car itself, and Part 3 will tell the story of the car's racing history. A history that will defy virtually everything you have ever been told or can find on the internet. Let's begin. To start, much of what you know about this car is wrong, and it comes from a single, shoddily crafted story by an otherwise talented drag racing journalist, the late Chris Martin. Martin's work in the sport is well known. He worked at the NHRA's National Dragster for many years, published the Top Fuel Handbook Reference Guide, and also consumed virtually any liquefied, pillified, or powderized fun potion that anybody placed in front of him. Well, he passed long before I ever had the chance to meet him. I worked with some of his former colleagues, and the stories are amazing. Martin penned a short story for a now defunct drag racing website that can be found at another location, and this piece tells the, quote, story of the Terrifying Toronado in a couple hundred pithy, dismissive, and sarcastic words. It's also wholly inaccurate and based on the memories of a man who unfortunately was in a blurred state of mind in the present reality, let alone having any sort of historic mental clarity. But Martin does not bear all the onus for the hack story of the Terrifying Toronado. In fact, John Smiser himself actually wrote things in magazines about the car's timeline and fate that were inaccurate and sometimes fabricated, it seems. Take this along with some uncannily interesting historical coincidences, and we have a story that's far, far more interesting than the one you think you know. My aim here, as it always is, isn't to simply call something incorrect and move on, but to show you the hows and whys that these mistakes have been made, and then give you the evidence, real physical evidence, to set the story straight. The end of this series of 3 videos, should you make it there, will be a direct call to action, though I can promise you it is one that you will never, ever see coming. I began trying to dig into the history of the Terrifying Toronado for the same reasons anyone else has given the car a second thought. The thing was wild and audacious, cutting edge in some ways and downright wrong in others. I expected to find the story of a man inspired into an idea he could not execute, who then disappeared back into the shadows of history, defeated and obscure. Instead, this turned into a months-long investigation that led me down paths both human and historic that I never expected. Paths that involve family members, former drivers, and discoveries about the man who made this car I never saw coming. Like so many of you, I was under the impression that the Terrifying Toronado, this wild, twin, blown-engine Oldsmobile, was a short-lived fluke that tried to run over the grandstands on its first day at the drag strip and was never seen again. I cannot tell you how wrong that is, but I am going to try. So with all this said, let your education and the historical redemption of John Smiser begin. The year is 1964, and Southern California is the greatest mecca of the sport of drag racing in the world. The whole region was teeming with cars, drivers, chassis shops, speed parts manufacturers, and more. It was the hotbed of hot rodding, and the pinnacle of that part of the automotive world was top fuel drag racing. There were no such things as funny cars yet, and a young guy named John Smiser was one of the many enterprising young men who would work their fingers to the bone during the week to climb the ladder in drag racing on the weekend. In 1964, John Smiser is not a rich man, but he is enterprising and capable. He is his own mechanic and driver, and he makes his living with his hands as a contractor, capable of taking on almost any job. But his nights and weekends, those have been spent around hot rods since he was old enough to drive. Little's known about John's earlier cars, but we do know this. By 1964, John Smiser's stock was on the rise in top fuel drag racing, and he officially broke through that year in July at Mickey Thompson's Fontana International Dragway. The Redlands Daily Facts, July 28, 1964. Headline: Gablich drives Valkyrie Jet to victory. Quote, Gary Gablich, driving the Valkyrie Jet dragster, defeated Paul Sutherland's Fuel dragster in their first 2 out of 3 match race before 5,891 fans Saturday night at Mickey Thompson's Fontana International Dragway. Gablich reached a speed of 218.44 miles per hour in winning the first race, lost the second, and came back with a 216.86 mile per hour run to win the third and deciding race. Top Eliminator honors went to John Smiser of San Gabriel, California, over two of the nation's top drivers, Tom McEwen of Long Beach and Gablich, who was also driving the Sandoval Brothers dragster of San Fernando. Sam Rose of San Bernardino won Gas Eliminator, defeating world record holder John Peters' Freight Train. Glenn Collins, also of San Bernardino, drove the Heidelberg Roadster to its second straight Middle Eliminator title. End quote. After this strong performance, defeating two of the nation's best-known dragster drivers, John Smiser's name appeared in the newspaper again, this time just 3 days later, promoting an event coming up the following weekend at the racetrack. Redlands Daily Facts, July 31st, 1964. Headline, Field of 50 Dragsters in Fontana event. Quote, a field of more than 50 fuel and gas dragsters have filled entries for Saturday night's Summer Drag Racing Championships at Mickey Thompson's Fontana International Dragway. A purse of more than $3,000 in cash has lured such top fuel dragster stars as Paul Sutherland and Dick Stahl of Long Beach, Gary Gablich and the Sandoval Brothers dragster of San Fernando, Jack Yule of San Pedro, and last Saturday night's winner, John Smiser of San Gabriel. Sutherland has been listed as a pre-race favorite. However, Gablich has been running very strong in the past few weeks and recently set a strip elapsed time record in San Fernando. Sutherland holds the strip elapsed time record at Fontana with a run of 7.87 seconds. Gablich is not far behind with the best clocking to date of 7.91 seconds. With Yule, Stahl, and Smyser all under 8 seconds, the Summer Championship should provide some excellent racing. End quote. The car remained a strong presence all through that 1964 summer, and in 1965, Smyser did something important. He placed all of his personal efforts on the tuning and setup side of the car and placed his close friend Nando Hassi in the driver's seat. Hassi, who is still alive today, has been a big contributor to the factual information you'll find in this video, along with John's daughter Wendy Smiser, who helped get us connected. It should be mentioned that Nando and John maintained such a close, almost brotherly relationship that he is still referred to as Uncle Nando by John's kids even today. Not only that, he was the perfect man for the seat of the dragster. As it turned out, during the height of the top fuel wars in Southern California in the mid-1960s, these two were a monstrous combination, especially at Fontana. How good were they? Listen to this. The San Bernardino County Sun, May 13, 1965. Lycan retains number 3 ranking among dragsters. Dick Lycan of San Diego came from behind to retain his number 3 spot in the National Fuel Dragster ratings, defeating Gary Gablich of Long Beach in the final 2 rounds of their 2 out of 3 match race Saturday at Fontana Dragway. In another best-of-3 match, Doug Robinson of Pasadena in the Horsepower Engineering Dragster defeated Dick Stahl of Culver City to keep his number 7 title. Top Eliminator went to Nando Hassi of Upland, who upset the Surfers Dragster with Mike Sorokin of Santa Monica driving. These guys didn't just beat the Surfers once, they would face them down on a near weekly basis. The stories from the era are pretty incredible. Just days later, the two men found themselves in a familiar position in Fontana. The Independent Star News, May 16, 1965. Headline, Robinson wins Top Eliminator. Quote, Doug Robinson of Pasadena in the Horsepower Engineering Dragster, the nation's number 7 rated car, defeated Nando Hassi of Upland to win Top Eliminator honors before 4,156 fans Saturday night at Fontana Dragway. Former record holder Ken Safford of North Hollywood had the evening's top speed and fastest elapsed time with a run of 201.34 miles per hour in 7.56 seconds. 2 weeks later, the Los Angeles Times, May 30th, 1965. Headline, Hassi top man in Fontana Drags. Nando Hassi of Upland captured the opening round of the 2-day United Drag Racing Association Spring Championships at Fontana Dragway last night with a speed of 199.1 miles per hour. The meet, which drew 5,984 fans, will conclude tonight with more than 50 of the nation's fastest fuel dragsters competing for starting berths. Qualifying begins at 1 p.m., with eliminations starting at 7 o'clock. End quote. June 2nd, 1965. Redlands Daily Facts. Downey wins drag crown. Quote, unheralded Bob Downey of Alhambra won the overall title and Top Eliminator Sunday as the 2-day United Drag Racing Association Spring Championships came to a close at Fontana Dragway. Downey defeated one of the favorites, Mike Sorokin of Santa Monica in the Surfers Dragster to win Sunday's Top Eliminator, then came right back to top Saturday night's Top Eliminator Nando Hassi of Upland to win the overall title. Top speed and low elapsed time of the 2-day meet went to Larry Faust of Long Beach with a run of 208.32 miles per hour in 7.5 seconds. Pre-race favorites Tom McEwen of Long Beach and Don Prudhomme of Van Nuys suffered defeats early in eliminations, both Saturday and Sunday night. End quote. The way their car ran through the months of May and June of 1965 is incredible. The Raider Wheel Special Dragster is either winning each week or losing in the final round. Now, these are not family tall tales. As I've just showed you, these are documented in the newspapers of the time. And while the Surfers would ultimately win the most races at Fontana that season, Smiser and Hassi were right behind them, and they gave as good as they got. All this being said, the truly huge moment for the pair would not come at Fontana in June of 1965, though. Instead, it would come at Riverside International Raceway during the Hot Rod Magazine Championship Drags. This was, for all intents and purposes, a national event. Of the major drag racing sanctioning bodies, there was about a dozen, maybe less, national events held nationally over the course of a drag racing season at this time in history. The Hot Rod Magazine Championship Drags were not a points-earning event for the NHRA or AHRA or UDRA, but instead a special one-off race that was operated effectively like an NHRA national event because of the deep-seated relationship between Robert E. Peterson of Hot Rod and Wally Parks, the former editor of the magazine and the founder of the NHRA. This was a race produced at the highest level with the best media coverage, glitzy prizes, and a whole lot more. As such, this event drew the cream of the crop nationally in the sport. This was not weekly racing at Fontana, where the occasional hitter would show up. This was the big leagues. And despite their localized success, Smiser and Hassi, along with their Raider Wheels dragster, arrived as virtual unknowns. They would not leave that way. Over the course of a race day that saw lots of red lights and upsets, the Christmas tree ditched after the second round for a Lions dragstrip-style two-light starting system, and our heroes Smiser and Hassi running just good enough to advance through their rounds, the two found themselves in the final against James Warren. Warren had driven two dragsters at the event. In the final, it was the Warren and Crow dragster they'd be facing after they had beaten the likes of John the Zookeeper Mulligan in round 1, John Edmonds in round 2, Nick Marshall in round 3, and Connie Coletta in the semifinals. It should be mentioned here that Coletta was a titan of Top Fuel drag racing in 1965. He had won the March meet and then run up and down California, earning enough money with his dragster to buy a small airplane from Ted Hallebrand of Hallebrand Wheels, in which he began a modest flying service. He was typically moving parts for the Ford Motor Company and other small jobs he could gather. Connie Coletta took one airplane, earned with money he made with his dragster, and has turned that into the largest privately owned fleet of cargo jumbo jets in the world. But I digress. In the final round of the Hot Rod Magazine Championship Drags, Hassi got the jump on Warren and was leading until his car got loose at about the same time Warren's engine decided enough was enough. Nando Hassi expertly pedaled by him, and the two guys, called the, quote, Upland Upstarts in Ray Brock's breathless hot rod race report, the hard-running Fontana stalwarts, had won the biggest race of their lives. Here's what it looked like.
Anyone can win. It's been proven time and time again as a dark horse entry, seldom heard from in previous weeks, rolls up to the starting line on the final round of eliminations, ready to go for the top prizes. Such was the case with Nando Hassi, a young driver just getting his start in big-time professional drag racing. Nando survived one of the toughest fields of cars ever assembled to emerge the winner of the Hot Rod Magazine Championship drag races. His consistent performances and dependable engine and car resulted in this young Southern Californian's biggest win. Time for the awards and honors. Nando Hassi and crew chief John Smiser receive awards from the Queen, Bob Peterson, president of Peterson Publishing Company, and publisher Ray Brock.
While the story was covered by many newspapers, I'm partial to the coverage given on June 21st, 1965 by the Los Angeles Times, in a story written by Bob Thomas entitled Hassi Upsets Riverside Drag Field. Dateline Riverside. Quote, as the hot dogs dissolved around him in a maze of red lights and mechanical failures, the 24-year-old gas company worker from Upland emerged Sunday as the winner in the second annual Hot Rod Drag Racing Championships at Riverside International Raceway. And Nando Hassi did it without so much as threatening the fabled 200-mile-per-hour mark as he survived a series of 5 head-to-head runoffs over the quarter-mile strip with the country's top fuel dragsters. Hassi's final victim in a twilight showdown before what was left of a crowd of 21,734 fans that braved repeated program delays and a failure of the starting light system was Jim Warren of Bakersfield, California. The winning car, one of those arrow-shaped machines that burns a special hot fuel blend rather than gasoline, was timed at 7.7 seconds for the distance, reaching a top speed of 180 miles per hour. Warren, who blew his Chrysler engine near the finish, was clocked at 8.03 seconds with a speed of 161 miles per hour, although he had easily exceeded 200 miles per hour earlier in the eliminations. Subtitle 3-year vet. Hassi, who has been around drag racing for 3 years, won $1,000 cash and a 1965 Plymouth Barracuda as part of the meet's $15,000 purse. His car, the Raider Wheel Special, is owned by himself and partner John Smiser, also of Upland. It is powered by a 1956 supercharged 354 cubic inch Chrysler engine. It was a bad day for favorites. Red lights indicating foul or jump starts eliminated Tom McEwen, Danny Ongaias, and Connie Coletta among the big names. Coletta was beaten by Hassi in the semifinal round. Danny Milani, a 211-mile-an-hour racer, lost in the first round when he was left at the starting line. Don Prudhomme had the day's hot run of 211.76 miles per hour with an elapsed time of 7.54 seconds, but cracked a piston in the process and dropped out on the second round. An accident in the pits put out another contender, Mike Sorokin, shortly after he eliminated Milani in the first round. Hassi beat John Mulligan with his best speed of 196.06 miles per hour. He went on to eliminate John Edmonds, Nick Marshall, and Coletta before he got to Warren. Warren had 2 chances. He also drove another dragster in the 32-car field of qualifiers. However, that car was eliminated in the first round. The day's program, which began at 6 a.m., dragged, pun intended, for 13 hours. Nearly an hour was lost in the late afternoon when the starting lights broke down. Actually, the greatest crowd reaction developed during the top stock car eliminations. In the final runoff, the crowd was supporting a pretty young housewife from Tulare named Shirley Shahan and a Hemi-headed 1965 Plymouth. She had to give a 3-car length handicap advantage to rival Ray Christian of Columbus, Ohio, who was driving a 1963 Dodge, one of the original Ramcharger machines. It was just too much. Christian won by half a car length. End quote. Hot Rod Magazine's coverage of their own race is pretty spectacular, and I will excerpt some of that here. In the second paragraph of the story, it reads, "Even before the first truck aligned itself behind the slim tube push bar of the initial fuel car on Riverside Raceway's hot black asphalt, filaments of feeling began to drift to our offices, allowing a preview of what was to occur on the 18th, 19th, and 20th of June. Nearly every name rail in the country was entered. The Hawaiian, the Old Master, Yakel Plymouth Special, Mangler, Bounty Hunter, Beacon Auto Parts, Catelli Speed Shop, Frantic 4, the Surfers, and the drivers. Don Prudhomme, Mike Snively, Tom McEwen, Danny Ongaias, Connie Coletta, Rick Stewart, Denny Milani, Norm Weekly, Mike Sorokin, Gentleman Jim Schubeck, and someone named Nando Hassi." Skipping through the story to a section that now covers the eliminations in Top Fuel, we begin with this paragraph. "The new lighting facility proved a boon to some and a bane to others. Nick Marshall, suddenly the man to beat with an extra 10% in the tank, might have well been encouraged to leave on the green, but he solidly red-lighted against Nando Hassi the very next time up. Jim Warren at the helm of the Warren and Crow car, he had been piloting the Warren and Coburn machine that was previously eliminated, by contrast, been leaving early on the tree, started even sooner with the LL hole-shotting his way to the final round with Nando and company. If anyone had been willing to bet 2 days earlier that the final blast of the Hot Rod Magazine Championships would have been between Nando Hassi of Upland and the Raider Wheel Special and Jim Warren of Bakersfield, they could have almost named their own odds. Yet here the two were, both in possession of consistently good but not great elapsed times. Hassi had been 770s and Warren 760s, and showing that after everything is said and done, this may be more the key to success than an all-out 210-750 run. The ground shook as both engines came up after the staging lights went on, and then the orange, and then it was Nando by a nose out of the gate, with Jim appearing to be closing in mid-range. Roughly about 2/3 of the way down the course, Hassi got out of shape, and he kept on it, driving out of his difficulty to take the pot and all the marbles with another 770 even. He took the win with 354 inches of Chrysler and a 1,320-pound Jim Davis frame dragster. His equipment selection included most of the familiar stuff, with a camshaft that is quite a rare bird these days, but to those who remember, is a page from drag racing scrapbook. It's a grind that a decade ago struck fear into the competition, the Potbin Eliminator camshaft. Nando Hassi and his partner John Smiser won the Hot Rod Championships because of hard work, reliable equipment, a bag of luck, and just possibly because they deserved it. On the last round of Top Fuel, Warren and Crow were having difficulty getting ready when the time was shortened to speed up the lengthy program. Their opponents, Hassi and Smyser, instead of making the single, which would have been entirely legal, waited for them for the sake of a good show and the brand of disappearing sportsmanship that emphasizes the method as well as the triumph itself. William Shakespeare once wrote, in a work committed to the memory by schoolboys across the land, that there was a tide in the affairs of man, that when taken at the flood, would lead on to fortune. Nando Hassi's win is the kind of high wave that he and John Smiser, the upland upstarts, may well ride to greater triumphs in the months ahead. These are the little guys everybody in racing likes to see win. We wish them well." End quote. And like is mentioned at the close of this story, the guys were able to ride the wave, but perhaps with a twist. They continued their weekly Southern California exploits, but they were also paid to travel some now. They went and broke track records in Utah, traveled to Texas the next weekend for an event in Amarillo, hit a couple of other small venues on the way back, and finished the 1965 season in September with a runner-up to close the year at Fontana, and lastly, with a paid appearance at the opening of the Santa Maria drag strip in November of 1965. Another massive honor came their way that month. The Raider Wheels Special was on the cover of Hot Rod magazine. One of the perks of winning the race was the cover shot as well as a feature spread in the Bible of the hot rodding world. As you can see, the car has been repainted bright yellow for this occasion, and the feature, entitled Giddy Up Hassi, is an ode to the little guys winning big. As all this was happening, Nando Hassi had decided to split away from John Smiser and build his own car, and the Riverside winning car was sold to Ray Schultz, who kept John on as the crew chief through the end of the season. This wasn't a bad thing per se. John Smiser's mind was turning in a completely different direction these days. As we'll learn in the next video, he was disenchanted with the trappings that came from the hot rod win. Yes, there was a smattering of bookings, but nothing like he expected, and nothing like he knew the new breed of funny cars were getting. John Smiser wasn't much a fan of the funny cars. He saw them more as circus vehicles or showpieces rather than racing machines. But he knew some of the owners, and he heard the fantastic stories of the money they were making as booked-in attractions from coast to coast. The purity of Top Fuel drag racing and its raw competition appealed to everything about John Smiser's personality and his traditional side. But the practical side of John Smiser saw the financial gain a funny car could bring, and that was simply too much to ignore. John Smiser knew two things at the end of 1965. Any funny car he built would have to be different from anything that already existed on planet Earth. And secondly, inspiration can come from the most unexpected of places. Stay tuned for part 2. Like and subscribe for more automotive, historic, and gearhead content. Thank you for watching.